Sorry, we're getting here late. Just came out of the special ed, and they take it right to the edge. So, um, Dean, I need to set you up right here real fast, and you're good to go. So, Dean Wright from the State Department of Education, Public School Finance, talking about attendance and enrollment. We're ready whenever you are, Dean. You should be able to share your screen.
Okay, I've unmuted myself and
I can hear you.
sharing my screen. How's that? Can you see it?
It's coming in. Yes, you're good to go.
Okay. Well, welcome everyone. Again, my name is Dean Wright from Public School Finance. The presentation today is attendance and enrollment as to public school funding. Trying to make sure that your data allows you every possible funding dollar. So I am doing well, better than I deserve, and I hope you are doing well as well.
Just a quick
So,
note, Dean, anybody who wants to hit the record button, we are allowing that. So, but we are also recording these. And I think, Dean, are you going to try to get these online?
yeah, I believe so. As soon as we can get the transcription and everything.
Right, right. We have to make those ADA compliant, so it does take a lot of work. All right, I'm going to get out of your way, Dean. And I got just real quick, everybody. Dean is kind of new to our group. He is brilliant. I have really enjoyed working with Dean, so I think you're going to find that he is a great resource. In the meeting here, we'll have the chat open. We also have a Q&A area, and I'm going to try to field the questions in there as much as I can so the deans can do his flow. He may want to jump on those occasionally, but if there's a question I can't answer, we'll try to get that in front of you, Dean. Also, we'll be watching for participants who may be attaching via phone. And for those folks, we may need to reiterate those questions because they may be good. So again, I'm going to try to get out of your way now and let you do your deal.
Okay. All right. So on the screen, you can see the outline, 5 basic areas to the presentation today. We're going to talk attendance. Then we're going to talk on a little bit about enrollment, the ISEE submission schedule. Going to spend quite a bit of time on some helpful reports and also quite a bit of time on instances of special note. So here we go. So attendance, just a fact that 90% of Idaho public school funding is based on student attendance. So to say that it's important that attendance is accurate and properly reported is an understatement. It's extremely important to everyone. So attendance goes through, when you take student attendance or the school takes student attendance, it goes through several transformations until it eventually is transformed into school funding. So just an overview, the daily student attendance you take is translated into days or hours, depending on the calendar, and more on that later. That those days and hours are then form aggregate attendance or total attendance, and those are grouped up into the grade groupings, kinder, elementary, and secondary. That is then transformed into a calculation of average daily attendance. Average daily attendance converts to support units. That support units are then, funding is paid out based on support units. So another way to look at it is with a common report. This is, if you recognize it, as current year support unit report. Aggregate attendance is here in the column I've noted. Aggregate attendance is divided by days in session to get ADA. ADA is adjusted for the special ed allocations appropriate to the different grade groupings. Then that ADA is subject to a unit divisor to convert to support units, and the unit divisor table is what I have on the screen here for your reference. Depending on the level of ADA in the different grade groupings, there is a different divisor. So that's where those divisors come from. And adjusted ADA divided by the unit divisor gives us support units. Just kind of another way to look at all of those transformations. So more specifically, ADA, how is it described? Well, it's described in board rule, IDAPA. When a pupil is under the guidance and direction of a teacher while school is in session, and I've got two graphics up, that is going to happen on the left, traditionally in a classroom setting, but it also happens in a virtual classroom setting these days. So attendance is counted by days. So no matter how it is recorded, it's counted in days and specified in code, where a whole day or a 1.0 day is 4 or more hours of instruction, where instruction excludes lunch, breaks, passing time, and recess. So can include those times in instructional time. A half day is less than 2.5 hours, or it is less than 2.5 hours of instruction. So by way of an example, we have the student that in a month, or they've attended they've had this attendance, where 1.0 is a whole day where they were there more than 4 hours. And we can see that there were some days in the second week where they were not there for at least 2.5 hours. I should say I messed up on the 2.5 hours. Greater than or equal to 2.5 hours, up to, but not including the 4 hours is a half day. So days converts to average daily attendance, ADA. And just this year, if you don't know by now, I'm letting you know that ADA, instead of being based on enrollment, as in the last 3 years, ADA this year is based on seat time, back to what it was pre-COVID. Code tells us how to convert days to average daily attendance. It's basically the number of days divided by the days in session, the days of instruction in session, and that's determined by your calendar. So my example here, in week 1, this particular student accumulated 5 days, 5 whole days. The school was in session for 5 days, so the ADA is 1 for this week. The second week, when they were absent 2 of the days, they accumulated 2 whole days, divided by the 4 full days of instruction that week, gives an ADA of 0.5. And I won't go through the last 3 examples, but you can kind of see how that works, so that for this period of time, the student amassed 20.5 days divided by 24 days of instruction, gives an ADA of 0.85 for this period of time. That's average daily attendance, ADA. Student information systems is how we get all of those hours and days, and they are great tools. And the State Department of Education recommends that elementary teachers take attendance twice a day, in the AM and then the PM. Secondary teachers, we recommend that that they take attendance each class period. Calendars are the key building blocks to proper attendance being translated and sent to us. There should be at least one calendar for each school building. And the reason for that is in the case of if there has to be an emergency closure, that allows that building, if that building by itself is the only one affected, that allows that building to be identified with the emergency closure. You run into trouble if several buildings are on the same calendar, and only one is affected by an emergency closure. If you have a K-6 elementary, you would need at least 2 calendars, because you would need a kinder calendar and you would need at least one other calendar, but you may need more calendars if the different grades have different days of instruction, and that just occurs naturally. Sometimes grades 5 and 6 may not have the same days of instruction as grades 1 through 4, for instance, for one reason or another. You would want to set those up on different calendars when that happens. Calendar IDs need to be unique, and calendar setup should be reviewed by multiple people because it's very important. So looking at the different calendar types, we have 6 different calendar types, 3 of which report days, whole and half, and the other 3 report attendance and hours. But like I mentioned before, in the end, all of these, whether it's days or hours, they are all eventually translated into days so that average daily attendance can be calculated. So what happens if students attend less than 2.5 hours a day? Well, they can still have their hours totaled per week by board rule, so that they can count for ADA. So here's how that would work. Let's just say a student attends 2 56-minute periods a day. Well, 56 minutes twice a day is 1.866 hours. They would be set up on a calendar that would report hours. And in this case, it's a dual enrollment calendar, more on that later. But they would be set up, and so that they would get those hours recorded. And the calculation of ADA happens off to the right in the blue table. You can see that in this first week, 9.33 is the total number of hours, divided by the 4-hour standard. For a day, it's 4, remember, it's 4 or more hours, so that 4 represents a 4-hour standard. That gives us 2.33 days. Well, days are either whole or half, so the day is then this value, 2.33, in this case, rounds up to the nearest half, or 2.5. We can then convert the day, 2.5 days, to ADA by taking the 2.5 and dividing by the 5 days of instruction. So the second week, the total hours is 3.7 approximately, divided by 4 gives us just under 1. Well, that just under 1 rounds up to the nearest half a day, rounds up to a whole day. 1 whole day divided by 4 days of instruction would give 0.25 ADA. So on and so forth. Alternative students also have their attendance reported in hours, like the previous example of a student attending less than 2.5 hours a day. But theirs is based on a 25-hour week standard. And also there is a cap of 25 hours. And we'll see that here. I've just set this student example up so that they've got this schedule each week. Well, that is 25 and a half hours this week that the student attended. Well, the cap is 25. And essentially, you divide that hours by 25 to get the ADA. The second week, they had this attendance. And so it's 9.5 hours. We didn't reach the cap of 25, so it's still 9.5 hours with the cap. 9.5 divided by 25 is 0.38. So on and so forth for the other examples. So those are alternative students in the calculation of ADA. I'll just pause just a little bit. I didn't, oh. I see that there are a few questions. An alternative student is written in Idaho code. I apologize for not having the Idaho code referenced here. We can certainly get that after the presentation and put it in there. There are several different qualifications.
I can work on getting that and posting it for you.
Okay, thanks, Roger. Okay, so on to talk about enrollment. Official counts for enrollment are set by Idaho code and are taken on October 1st, December 1st, February 1st, and April 1st. And the most important thing that I can tell you to remember is that student entry and exit dates for the district, for the school, and for courses are extremely important that those are accurate. It's also important that the course minutes per week is an appropriate amount for each course so that they are those that should be considered fully enrolled, full-time enrollment, which is 1,200 or more minutes per week of coursework, so that they are considered full-time equivalent enrolled. So next, looking at the ISEE submission schedule, there are 7 submissions that we're highlighting. I'm highlighting here. This is a submission schedule that public school finance makes to kind of highlight what's most important for us in terms of getting the data we need to calculate funding. Notice we are currently in the middle of the summer alternative data submission period. We're almost to the end of it. So we've got pay close attention to the data submission periods, when those begin and when those ends. And then there are correction deadlines for the February payment, the May payment, and the July payment. Also, the December 1st date isn't captured in this first midterm November reporting period. So we have a separate, so there is a separate submission for the enrollment count in December. That's here. And the same is true in May. Just in red down here, just notes that any corrections for attendance and enrollment that you make, that you upload for the midterm reporting period, automatically update and can be made all the way until the end of the year deadline, the June deadline. But for staffing, any corrections to staffing data that you make that happens after the December 1 correction deadline won't automatically update, and you'll need to contact Branwyn Phillips with within public school finance about making updates after that date. Okay, so moving into the section of the presentation talking about helpful reports, I've kind of divided the helpful reports into 3 different job areas. Building personnel, that might be like a office building secretary. ISEE personnel, these are ISEE coordinators, and business managers or superintendents at the district office side. So for all of these reports, like the aggregate attendance detail report, can be found within the ISEE portal in the applications under reports. This one happens to be under general attendance, the aggregate attendance detail. We'll talk more about each one of these and I'll show examples. The attendance building level is in the attendance unit calculation reports. You're going to be pulling reports out of this area a lot this year because attendance is seat time. Enrollment is FTE enrollment up here. It's FTE. And we're going back to funding based on attendance. So be careful of that. The attendance building level. More about the data transparency tool in a bit. The attendance current year support unit calculation, which we've already seen an example of, and the net enrollment report are located in these 2 areas. And I'll kind of talk about those together. Enrollment prior year support unit calculation is up here in the enrollment reports, and it's prior year. That was last year. We were based on enrollment, so that's why we're pulling it from this section. Greater than one ADA is down here in this section. So on to the reports. Oh, and the data transparency tool. We'll take a look at that as well. So the aggregate attendance detail report, here's an example with all of student PII removed. This is a great report for a business manager or IC person to run and then distribute to each of the buildings in the district or charter school. Because those building level people are going to be best able to, each of these sheets is a different building, and it's going to show by week each kid's attendance at the different grade levels. And so just looking at this, what I've highlighted here, this particular student was there for 1 day, the first week of school, but then looks like they were unenrolled because these were blanks. So the question might be, were they actually even there the first day? I would pay note of low numbers here, unexpectedly low numbers. That's what they should be looking for. And also, so here we have a couple students that had zeros these 2 weeks. Were they really absent and not there any of these days? It looks like it was a 3-day week here and a 4-day week here. So were these students really absent? It could be something that the building level person could look further into, and corrections could be made. And I should also note that you can view these reports that I'm showing a day or 2 after you up your initial uploads of them. So you gotta wait a day or 24 to 48 hours, then you can take a look at these reports. Moving on to the second level, more of an IC coordinator. This is more, because the attendance building level is more having to do with calendars, but that could also be a building level person. So like before, they're separated into buildings, and looking at This column that I've highlighted, days in session, are these the true days in session, instructional days that should be for this particular grouping, the elementary grouping at this particular elementary school? Are these days correct? Did we have 4 instructional days on the week beginning this? The other thing to look at on this particular report is look at the ADA column. See if you see any anomalies. I saw one that on the week beginning November the 14th, this particular school in grade grouping had a lower than normal ADA. They dipped below 40, which they had been above 40. So was there something going on this week that caused the attendance to be low that week? Something to look into. Maybe there's an error in the data with a few students. It could be. So just make note of the ADA column. So as I mentioned, the data transparency tool is another really useful tool. It's very useful in trying to identify potential issues and investigate where the issues might be. You get to it a little differently in the apps. Instead of it being under reports, it's got its own separate link box called DTT. First thing you'll notice is that you'll be able to choose the 4 different dates that I have mentioned, because this is an FTE report, an enrollment report, 4-1, 10-1, 12-1, 2-1. I just happen to have 4-1 selected here. And you can see that this particular district that I've chosen as an example, they had 213 noses, 213 students total on this day, and they were amassing 201 FTE. Well, that ratio is about 95%. And normally we would expect the ratio of headcount to FTE to be above 90, nearer the 95%. It isn't always the case. A lot of times with alternative schools, that might not be the case. And some other instances, it may not be the case where you have that kind of a ratio. But this is something to look at. Also, there are several graphs. In this case, this is showing enrollment by grade. And the purple bar represents headcount, and the gold bar represents that particular grade's FTE. And as expected in Idaho, since Idaho funds kindergarten just half time, the gold bar, which represents FTE, is half of the purple bar. That makes sense. And in this particular district, there are only a couple areas. The grade 3, we see that the gold bar is lower than the purple bar. Otherwise, they're all pretty even, which means that for every kid, they're getting about 1 FTE. Now, if I was to guess, grade 3, seeing this, there probably is a 3rd grader that is only going part-time. Also, another graph shows minutes per week. And in this case, the purple bar is the average minutes per week at each grade level. The gold bar is the minimum or lowest minutes per week in that particular grade group. And the blue bar is the maximum. So there are a few students in grade 12 that have quite a few classes and are attending more than 2,000 minutes per week. And we can see that, like I suspected, over in the 3rd grade, there is a student or 2 that are attending a low number of minutes per week, maybe just a class or 2 in grade 3. The black bar going across is the 1,200 minute full-time equivalent standard. And you can see that this particular district, their average is meeting that all across. So this is an interesting graph. You can pick up a lot from it. Also, the data transparency tool has data exports of particular interest, I believe, is the student enrollment details. And this report, the example is here. This report shows every student that is enrolled, and on the particular date, in this case, it was a 4/1 date. Well, the school day was actually 3:30 because they weren't in session on April the 1st, so they went to 3:30. And so it shows what every kid is earning as far as FTE on this date. And we can see that some of the kids here are earning just a half a FTE. I'm guessing those are kindergartners. Here's a student that probably maybe the third grader that we were looking at that is only attending 203 minutes per week, only has one course. And that equates to just a 0.17 FTE. Looking at this, you want to look to see if your kid, if the students look correct, paying close attention to if there are any zeros here in this district FTE. That means on that date, that student did not earn an FTE. And when that happens, there is an exclusion reason. And so the most common exclusion reasons are the ones that I've highlighted. And those are, anytime you see those are things that you should look into. Because if it's happening on this date, it's likely happening on other dates, and it's reducing your ADA. More along the lines of the business manager, chief financial officer, superintendent, the attendance current year support unit calculation report shows, as we saw earlier, shows the calculation and how we get to the support units that are along the right-hand side. And each grade grouping, kinder, elementary, and secondary, is summarized, added up to get a total support unit. This was a district, so there was a cost of protection here. And so this is the amount of support units that would be adjusted for protection. Also note that the ADA, a summary of the ADAs at the different groupings is also on the lower right-hand corner here. These should be the same ADAs that are up above, but I suggest using the net enrollment report, which is a NOSES report. At the same time, you're looking at the current year support unit calculation report and running a little bit of a ratio. And this ratio can kind of tell you what your attendance rates look like. So that's what I'm trying to show here, where we've got the net enrollment report here, 18 kindergartners that were enrolled during the midterm. This is a midterm report. 18 kindergartners enrolled on the midterm submission date that are earning 18.1 ADA. Now that is possible to earn slightly a little more ADA than enrollment. And that's because there could have been a 19th kindergartner in this case that were there most of the midterm earning ADA, but then moved away the last week or two of the midterm period. Anyway, showing an attendance rate of 100%, okay? Whereas the elementary group, grades 1 through 6, ADA of 79.34 divided by the 85 kids shows an attendance rate of 93.3%. The secondary, likewise, is 91.8%, that ratio. So it's just kind of interesting to see what your attendance rates are. And I know many districts are looking at how can we improve attendance rates, especially this year as we go back to seat time based ADA. The enrollment prior year support unit calculation report is a very important report to run, and you can actually run it right now because it's pulling from FY23 last year. So these are last year's ADA levels for my example district. And this highlighted column is showing 97% of these numbers. It's calculating 97%. When you add those up, that gives us 205.29 ADA. Well, at that level of ADA, the district is protected. So if in 24, the district's seat time based ADA drops below 205.29, in my example, this district, then they will be protected. And their total protected support units won't be lower than 15.13, because this is the calculated number based on these numbers and the proper divisors. These are the numbers of support units that this level of ADA, the protected level of ADA, generates. So you could run this currently and know that you won't have support units lower than this. Now, keep in mind, there is a cost of protection to remove from this. So this district wouldn't be getting 15.13, the cost of protection, which could be somewhere between 3 and 5%, needs to be removed. Greater than one ADA report is important to look at to know which students you happen to be sharing. For example, in the first two rows, this student, my example student, Bugs Bunny, is shared between a tech high school that is in a different district than the high school, the home high school. And the state will automatically split the ADA proportionately based on the actual attendance. And so this report shows you that split. So for example, the tech high school, the raw ADA calculation was 0.31 for this week. And the home high school was 1.0. Well, that's greater than 1. And that isn't allowed in Idaho code or rule to have an ADA for a student greater than 1. So that has to be proportionally converted to, in this case, it would be 0.76 and 0.24. And so that's what this report shows you, who is being split. Now, keep in mind one thing, that both entities, if you're sharing a student, both entities had to have uploaded already. So keep in mind, if you're looking at this before the end of an upload period, you may not have all of the students identified because not everybody else may have already reported. Okay, so on to the last section of my presentation, which is instances of special note. And so the first one is what happens if we have emergency closures or impacted attendance. Well, Idaho code allows for this. Emergency closures are specifically closures for weather, adverse weather, facility failure, quarantine sickness, mass quarantine sickness, or a safety concern. It's pretty limited to those. Impacted attendance is when school remains open, but circumstances have caused a significant decrease in attendance. So maybe the school decided to keep school open knowing that there was a lot of sickness affecting the school. School remained open, but the net result was that their ADA dropped for that week or 2 weeks. There are remedies for both of these situations. And the remedy is that your ADA can be restored to typical levels, but for emergency closures, you have to send me a emergency closure form, which is on our website, the SDE website, in the public school finance section under resources, emergency closure file, brand new form created by Morgan Phillips as of last spring, I believe. You fill this out and email it to me, and we can make those adjustments if it's a qualifying emergency closure. Keep in mind, you also need to send in, once they're available, the board minutes showing that your board approved the emergency closure, but we'd like you to send the closure form in within 3 days of the closure, and hopefully that's possible. If you do have impacted attendance, that just requires a letter detailing the dates, grades, schools, and the circumstances that led to the significantly decreased attendance. And their superintendent or charter administrator signs it, and you can email that letter to me, and we can restore the ADA to typical levels. So let's talk about virtual schools. A virtual school is defined in Idaho code, and schools designated as virtual schools have an option of how to base attendance. They can base attendance on the actual hours of student attendance or engagement virtually, or they can base it on a percentage of coursework completed. And we recommend that virtual schools have a written policy that states their attendance tracking methodology. It's always a good idea to put that in writing in policy. So this is for a designated virtual school. Let's just say that your school has the capability in times of sickness of going to an online environment. So you send the kids home and they do the work at home for a week. Well, because you are not a designated virtual school, you are just temporarily doing that. You are not allowed to have the same flexibility as a school designated as a virtual school. If you have questions about virtual schools and that designation, Michelle Clement Taylor at the State Department of Education can give you more information. Also on our website, School Choice, there's information. Percentage of coursework completed option. So instead of it being the hours that a student spends, it can be based, and I may need Roger's help here a little bit because it's a little more into the, and perhaps into the weeds and out of my...
I'm ready.
Yeah, go ahead.
What would you like me to talk about?
Well, the question was, can you speak more on the percentage of coursework completed option? So
Is that in regards to the impacted attendance or virtual school?
Yeah, virtual school in
Okay.
regards to virtual school.
Well, here here's how it works. Idaho local control. Your your district, LEA rather, charter, etc., needs to have a policy of how you're going to track attendance and or coursework completed. You have to have that established if you're going to do a virtual school. You do not want to establish this after you have done a virtual school. Uh, for instance, IDLA tracks by a certain way, and they actually report to you what that attendance how is looking. If you are offering a virtual school, you either need to do login time or change the coursework completed. Like if they completed XYZ packets or on packets are not online, but that coursework for the week or whatever that demonstrates that they have done the time you expected, you can count that as attendance time. But you have to set that policy up when you create that virtual school internally. We are trusting that you are doing this, and then if there's question down the road, then we would probably come to you to ask for that policy so that we can verify that you have something in place. Is that about right, Dean?
Yeah, that's a great explanation. And at the very least, you should the designated virtual schools should be identifying work that should be completed in a specific period of time, and at least like these items need to be completed in this course this week. And if a student has got those items complete, then they get, for example, they could get all of the attendance for that week. But if they only have half of that work completed, then they would only get half of the attendance, half of the days, that sort of thing. So it does take a lot of work to identify what work needs to be completed, and then and then you have to go in and know how to measure that.
I'm trying to catch up on the questions. You know, the big thing here is that we're trusting you to do what's best for the kids, and that policy should reflect that.
Yeah, the question about day versus week versus term, definitely. I mean, I think policy. I would lean more towards day and week. An entire term might be a little bit inflexible if you just were looking at, well, by the end of the term they completed everything. So, but it's local control. It's up to the local entity. The statute and rule does not speak to that specificity. So another item, duly enrolled students. So we have two different varieties. We call them public duly enrolled students or non-public. So the difference, a publicly duly enrolled student is a student who is concurrently at the same time attending more than one traditional public school or public charter school or alternative school. And a non-public duly enrolled student is a student typically that is a private school student or a homeschool student that is also attending a public school, whether that's a traditional public school, a charter school, or an alternative school, but a public school. And so we suggest that when this happens, there is an agreement between the entities for the responsibility of summative assessments, grading, and SPED services. Publicly dual enrolled students, these are students that are shared between two public school entities. Tuition can be arranged between the two, so an agreement for tuition, or, as I mentioned before, the state will split the ADA proportionally based on the attendance. So let's look at that split of ADA. So for duly enrolled students, the ADA calculation and split depends on you putting them on the proper calendar. So if a student is coming to you and they are with you for less than 2.5 hours a day in your district or charter, then you should be putting them on a DR calendar if you want to if you want to have ADA generated. If they are coming to you and they are attending, their schedule is that they should attend 2.5 or more, then they should be put on a regular calendar, or perhaps an alternative calendar if they are an at-risk student. Keep in mind that if you, well, I have a note here that DR calendars aggregate hours to allow for positive attendance as long as the weekly aggregate is at least 2.5 hours. So if you had a student that is on a DR calendar, but they were gone a lot of the week, they may not get to 2.5 hours that week. So they very well might not have positive attendance. They have to get to 2.5 hours or more for the entire total for the week in order to have positive attendance. The other thing of note, if you and the other public entity have a tuition agreement and you don't want the ADA split, and you're the school that would normally place that student on a DR calendar because they're coming to you for less than 2.5 hours, if you're splitting the tuition and that's how it's being arranged, so in order for it not to be split, put them on a regular calendar. Then they will never have positive attendance because on a regular calendar, they have to have 2.5 or more hours a day. So that's the way that works. Early graduates. So if you have a student graduating after the first semester, mid-year, it's allowed for attendance to be for the second semester to be based on the first semester's attendance. And just keep in mind, they usually didn't have 100% attendance in the first semester. So try to give them attendance that matches their attendance pattern from the first semester in the second semester. And then there's a note there of the course code 86,000 and to use and make sure their minutes per week are adequate. You have to still set them up in courses with minutes per week in that second semester. And then you'd exit them at the end as a graduate 4A. If the student completed their their grades 1 through 12 curriculum a full year early, but came back the 12th year and enrolled in dual credit courses count towards regular attendance. So count them and make sure their courses, you have them in those courses. They should be getting ADA. If they completed, but they actually were exited with a early graduation 1 year, which is a 4G code, they are not to get attendance in that next year. These students are, however, eligible for the Advanced Opportunities Scholarship. So if you have any questions on that, Brock Astle is the contact here at SDE for that. Idaho Digital Learning Academy, students taking those courses, whether they be at your school physically or somewhere else in the evening, those courses, those course minutes count, that attendance counts towards your ADA. So make sure that that you're accounting for that. Foreign students, a sponsored foreign exchange student, those are students that are here on a J-1 visa. The district receives ADA just like any other regular student. Foreign students that are not here through a foreign exchange program typically have an F1 visa, and tuition must be collected. The district will not receive ADA for that student, and the on visa field should be selected Y for that. Yes, Y. Juvenile detention centers, there are 12. Basically, the thing to remember is if you have a student that normally is attending your school, if they have to go to the JDC gets all of that ADA for the time that they're enrolled there. And then when they return, then return to your school, then your school and district will be receiving that ADA. If you happen to have an in-district JDC, because of complications within the student information systems, at last I knew, these students needed to be exited because of the duplication of the EDUID within the district. He can't have that duplication in two different schools. And I believe lastly, self-directed learners, these are students that are eligible for a self-directed learner designation that allows flexible learning. It's agreement between the student, the teachers, administrators, and the parents or legal guardians. It's important to set up a policy on how your district or charter designates self-directed learners, how you monitor those students, and how you might rescind a designation once it's been given, if appropriate. Just a self-directed learner that isn't on a DR calendar is funded like a regular attendee, regardless of attendance. So you'll report their actual attendance. You'll report it. It's important that you report their actual attendance, but because you're marking Y in the self-directed learner field and on the student daily attendance files, there's also a place to identify self-directed learner. That will override their actual attendance so that they'll get full attendance as long as they are not on a DR calendar. Just make sure you're assigning the student courses that have an appropriate level of minutes per week so that you get FTE that's appropriate. The question is, well, let's see, we might have had a couple questions and we're just about out of time. There was a question, if you have a student at a JDC for 3 days, do you have to exit them from your school? I don't know, Roger, the last I had heard, if that was a in-district JDC, then I think that they did.
Actually, no.
No, you don't?
No. The JDC will always win, internal or external, and they will win completely. A student is attending by no choice, so okay. There's no sharing going on there. If it's internal, there's no, either way, you don't have to disenroll, particularly because these are short-term, and then the JDC just takes that attendance. Okay, so perfect. Either way.
Thank you for clarifying that. And I will adjust my presentation. Question about self-directed learner. Can self-directed learner be one day of the week, like on a Friday? I think the flexibility is left to the local to local control. So I would say that means yes, if the student, the teachers, the administrators, and the parents all agree to that sort of arrangement, and you're following what's in Idaho Code 33512D as far as the prerequisites, then I would believe so, yes.
And just a further comment on that, self-directed learner is a field on the student daily attendance. So those you can designate each day that it applies, or rather you have to designate each day that it applies.
Yeah. So there's a question about how do we mark attendance for our students attending JDC? Well, the JDC should you should mark them. If they're not there, then you're going to mark them not in attendance. The JDC should be reporting. Roger, am I correct here? The JDC should be reporting to
Yes.
those districts the attendance, and I don't know if that happens weekly or at the end of a stay, or do you know how that's done specifically?
Yeah, so like when a student's obviously not in your class and they're going to the JDC, you're just going to mark them as absent. And then the JDC is reporting just like you are in the regular ISEE uploads, and they're reporting those days as attending. So if you were to report them as attending yours as they're in the JDC, obviously that's going to be a little bit of a red flag on our side, that because it can't be in a regular class and the JDC at the same time. But you don't have to disenroll or anything. The JDC will take that attendance either way.
Right. I think that we are just a little bit over time. So I don't see any further questions. Roger.
Fabulous presentation, Dean. Good coverage there. There's a lot of stuff going on here, and Dean's a great resource. I try to offload the calls to him, and I try to mimic all his language and everything. So I do my best, but he's the guy that's looking at your data real closely. So cool, very good.
I appreciate that, Roger. Thank you. Yeah, Roger and I and Amy and Vance and Todd, we work in collaboration together. So it's a group effort. But I appreciate the time to present today, and I think that's it. That's the time. So I hope you all have a great afternoon.